Good afternoon, I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. My name is Tom, I am a full-time composer and producer living and working in Cardiff, and I thought that today I would talk about 3 plugins that are, for me, essential in the creation of ambient music. And just before I get into it, I'm doing a Q&A next week, so if you have any questions for me at all, ask them down in the comment section. Be sure to be subscribed and hit that bell, that way you can be notified when the Q&A goes up and I answer any and all of your questions. So here we go, 3 plugins that are essential for me in the creation of ambient music. And these may not be the same for everyone. Other people might prefer different plugins. Obviously, these are the things that I have found are completely essential in my workflow. They exist within all of my templates and I use them on pretty much every track that I write, which at this point, including all of the library work I've done in the last few years, is probably over 500 tracks. Plugin number 1 on that list is Black Hole by Eventide. An incredibly obvious choice to anyone who's ever used that plugin or knows about ambient music. This is a beautiful, beautiful reverb that effectively sits well on anything that you put it through, provided that you're looking for the sound that it has. Now, as far as I'm aware, it used to be the case that to get this reverb, you used to have to spend thousands on outboard reverb units by Eventide, and then it was integrated into the Eventide Space guitar pedal, but it's such a popular sound that it now exists as a standalone plugin. Now, it is a little bit pricey. I believe it's about $199 normally, but I've found that Eventide are always doing sales on them, so if you just wait a couple of months, there'll be some point where they drop the price massively. I remember when I bought it, I think it was reduced from $199 to $29 or something crazy like that. So if you see a sale on this plugin, buy it immediately because it is amazing. Here are some examples of how with just the default settings, you can completely transform a sound and let it fit into an ambient soundscape that you're trying to make. This is just an instance of the Labs Soft Piano by Spitfire Audio. If I play a soft, gentle melody, it'll sound like this. And then just adding this reverb, it transforms it into this. Beautiful stuff, right? And it just instantly creates this huge space, and it's not just that piano in particular that works with it. Basically any sampled piano that I've put through it sounds amazing, whether you're looking for big high velocity trailer pings, super gentle and intimate felt piano, or even recording a real acoustic piano through it. Pianos aside, you can take incredibly basic recordings of multiple different instruments and it will just do something to it that immediately makes it sound like it belongs in an ambient track. So for example, here is a very, very simple DI'd guitar part. And that just sounds like a boring DI'd guitar, right? But if I just add Black Hole to it, it's immediate. And that's not to say that there aren't other things that you should probably do to the guitar before it's part of a finished product, but there have certainly been tracks that I've worked on where I haven't needed to reamp the guitar or put it through any other simulation. I've just EQ'd it, compressed it, and put Black Hole on it, and it has worked for the ambient tracks that I make. It just does wonders, and like I said, I've been using it for years now on hundreds of tracks, and it is something that has a specific sound. So when you use it a lot yourself, you hear it in lots of other things. But the thing that I found is that something being popular usually means that it does an amazingly good job at something, and that's what Black Hole Reverb does. So another really good function of Black Hole is the ability to freeze the reverb. Now this will effectively take a snapshot of whatever is going through it and just infinitely continue that going along. It's effectively just hitting pause on the reverb, and I find that this is really, really good if you want to create washes and atmospheres going on in the background of your compositions. So I could take any melodic sound, and let's say for the sake of this example, I'm going to use an Armenian duduk. If I put a single note through that reverb, automate the freeze function on it, and then just bounce that to audio within the project, I've immediately got an audio file that contains a really nice sort of reverby wash that you can use as part of your background textures and atmospheres in a composition. It sounds like this. So that's plugin number 1, Black Hole by Eventide. Plugin number 2 is something that is also probably a very predictable choice, but again, I use this in all of my templates and have been using it on every track that I've done for the last 3 years, and that is Soundtoys Echo Boy. Now, unlike Black Hole, which I feel is a very specific reverb to ambient music, Echo Boy is a bit different in that it's completely versatile, and the reason it's on this list is because it's amazing for ambient music, but it's also just amazing for any sort of music production. It's basically, in my opinion, the only delay unit that you would ever need. And one of the functions that I use the most on it is the space echo function. Now, in ambient music and electronica in general, Roland space echoes have been a staple. You know, you see them in everyone's studio all of the time. They're incredibly expensive and they're vintage, so you've got to make sure that they're maintained properly. They're also mono, so if you want to get stereo effects through them, it can be super tricky. And there has been a recent sort of re-release by, I think, an Australian company, but again, it's really expensive and it's mono, and I often work very quickly and have very tight deadlines for things. I don't always have the time to spend a load of my workday routing things through external processing, printing those parts, and then what if I want to change it? So I will one day probably own a real space echo, but for now, if you want to get the sound of like a space echo, but you don't have $2.5 grand spare, then Echo Boy has got you covered. So take, for example, this very simple synth ARP. If I just slowly increase the mix on this, you'll hear it will give it life and give it rhythm and give it that ambient neoclassical echo effect. Another aspect of this plugin that is sometimes overlooked, certainly I overlooked this for the first few months of using it, is the ability to change the width. So if you use the Space Echo preset, which gives it that really nice Roland Space Echo sound, but it's all very tight. But if I go into the plugin, click on this button, I can adjust the width, which is effectively the stereo spread of that signal, and it will go from sounding like this to sounding like this. It's about the space. I find that with ambient music, especially the type that I personally write, I am always trying to create like the widest landscape of sound that I can, and being able to turn sounds and instruments into things that don't just feel like they're, you know, here, here, or here in the stereo field, but to give the impression that the stereo field is this sort of 3D sphere instead of just being a two-dimensional plane is really useful, and the Space Echo does a great job of that. Now, in terms of non-ambient production, there is nothing that you can't really do with this. If you want to get sort of distorted, gritty, radio-like sounding echoes out of things, then you can. If you want a sort of U2 style plucked guitar delay, then you can do that. So that's plugin number 2, Soundtoys Echo Boy, an incredibly versatile delay unit, and in my opinion, the only one that you really need to own. Now, the third and final plugin that I would say is essential for producing ambient music is not a creative effect. It's very boring. Also probably very predictable, but it is Fabfilter Pro Q3. It is just a simple EQ unit, but it's not just a simple EQ unit when you dive into it. Now, this EQ has effectively become an industry standard these days because of its versatility and its ease of function, and it just sort of does everything that you would want it to do. There have been a few EQs like the Slate Infinity EQ that came out recently that tried to effectively be a competitor to it, but the problem is that the Infinity EQ does not have what I think is the most valuable part of Fabfilter Pro Q3, and that is the dynamic mode. Now again, this is an expensive plugin. I think it's about $200 again, and it's just an EQ, and that seems like a really large amount of money to spend on something so simple. But trust me, if you do spend that money and you're producing music frequently, you will find that you use this plugin more than anything else. But you don't have to have it. It's the same with everything I've said, you know, this is just my own personal experience. You do whatever you want to do. And if you're not in a position where you're able to spend that kind of money on just an EQ, then that's fine. I used the Logic stock plugin until like halfway through last year. That's when I got Fabfilter Pro Q3. And so all of my debut album, my debut EP, and loads of tracks, I just used the free Logic stock EQ. So that works great, although I do find it really difficult now occasionally when I have to use that for something, not having Fabfilter Pro Q3. It's hard to let go of all the versatility and functions that Pro Q3's got. Anyway, Fabfilter Pro Q3. Loads of amazing features on here. For one, you can effectively create unlimited bands. It's incredibly user-friendly. To create a band, you just double-click anywhere, and you can adjust the Q factors on high and low-pass filters to be brick walls or to have an incredibly gentle slope. The plugin also allows you to select where in the stereo field you want it to be active. So if there's a build-up of like nasty, muddy stuff between 100 and 200 hertz, but you only want to get rid of it on, say, the left-hand side of the stereo field because it works in the mix everywhere else, you can do that, and you don't have to have a different instance of the EQ for each different portion of the stereo field. You can make one band as just a general low cut and then take out some other information just on one side within the same instance of the EQ. So you're not going to be slamming your CPU usage with hundreds of instances of this. And as I mentioned earlier, the dynamic mode is such a useful function because it effectively allows you to tame things without removing them completely. So here I've got a relatively muddy piano recording that sounds like this. Now you can see here where the sort of build-up of nasty muddy frequencies is, and I want to tame that down, but I don't want to completely get rid of it. If I was to do just a standard EQ cut on those frequencies, then I would lose some of the warmth and body of the instrument. What I want to do is keep that warmth there, but make sure that it doesn't ever become too much, and that's where dynamic mode comes in. If I just hit that switch there to turn on dynamic mode, I can change how much of those frequencies it's going to temper down. Turning it from this into this. So there we go. Those are 3 plugins that for me are completely essential in the creation of ambient music. And one additional thing that I would say, and I've mentioned this before in videos, but the best combination I've found for certain things is layering these 3 things together. You don't really want to just use these plugins by themselves. You will nearly always find yourself using Fabfilter after your reverbs. Now I have everything in my template sent to buses, and after the reverb or the delay unit in those buses, I put an instance of Fabfilter Pro Q3, because with ambient music, you're creating these big soundscapes and, you know, lush pads and dreamy ethereal stuff, but it's so easy when you're using incredibly long decay reverbs and dense delay units to end up with an incredibly muddy and overpowering mix. So you always want to use some EQ after these plugins to ensure that you're able to tame things down so that the overall mix never feels overpowered. So as a very quick example, here is my black hole reverb bus for one of my later singles. This is what it sounds like without any EQ. And this is what it sounds like with that EQ there. There's a big difference there, and as I alluded to earlier, one of the things with ambient music that you do need to be careful of is not just slapping a ton of reverb and delay on everything. It can initially, especially when you're just starting out and you're not really used to the mixing process, feel as if that's how ambient music is made and sounds sort of similar to artists that you like, but you'll end up with incomprehensible, dense, muddy, nasty mixes with high resonances that stick out really abrasively because they're being sent through a delay unit that is repeating it, you know, 50 times very slowly, so it's just always there. And you just need to be careful and make sure that whatever you do, you're doing it tastefully and with a certain degree of restraint. So don't get overcome with the need to just slather everything in reverb. But yeah, those are my 3 essential plugins for writing and producing ambient music. I really hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions or any corrections you want to make, I may have gotten certain things wrong, or you may have recommendations of better plugins to use and different applications for them, let me know all of that down in the comment section there, as well as any questions you may have for my Q&A next week. If you're interested in hearing any of my personal music, there'll be links down in the description there to all of my social medias, as well as my music on Spotify and a variety of different streaming platforms, and there'll also be a link to my shop where you can pick up a copy of my debut EP Her or my debut album The Deep Blue on vinyl, if that's your thing. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you very soon.